This program is brought to you by 3C TV. Like what you learned? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up on the latest 3C TV programs.
If you were at the last two Veteran Summits, then you probably did see me speak in the general session. And I want to make sure I differentiate what you saw then from what you're going to see today. That was a very brief, well, some of you might have thought it was too long, I don't know. But it was kind of a brief cutout of what you're going to be seeing today. So I'll explain exactly what this whole program is about. As Mike said, this is it's a two-part thing. And I'll talk about why it's a two-part thing here in a second as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. And this is the VetNet Ally program. Now, many of you were at a different program yesterday called the Welcome Home presentation, and Dr. David Josephs probably told you to come over here and see this one because these two programs are about the same length, but they're a little bit different. So let's talk a little bit first about who we are and why we're going to be talking to you today, and then we'll go over the agenda for what we're going to be doing, and we'll start from there. First, I want to introduce my partner today. This is Dr. Pat O'Rourke. He is the Director of Active Duty and Veterans Affairs Services at the Chancellor's Office of the California State University. It's a new position, which I think really shows the kind of dedication of the CSU towards its veterans. I think it's a very important thing for us to have. In your system, if you're all from the community colleges, you have David Lawrence, who has a very similar position for that system as well. Pat is an Army veteran. He's a retired lieutenant colonel, and he's just an all-around great guy. And if you need evidence of that, the woman that he's standing next to right here is one of the nicest people I've ever met. And if she approves of him, then you know that he must be a pretty good person. So, now I want to introduce someone else as well, and that person's actually not here today. This is Mike Barraza. He's a psychologist that used to work in our Counseling and Psychological Services office. He was really instrumental in helping us when we put this program together a few years ago. So although he's not here today in person, you'll definitely be hearing his voice through us, so we want to make sure we introduce him as well. And then I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Marshall Thomas. I'm the Director of Veteran Services at Cal State Long Beach. I'm a veteran of the Marine Corps, and as you can tell, I actually was much better looking and thinner a long time ago than I am today. But I did serve in the Marine Corps for 6 years, and it was a fantastic experience. All right. Now, a lot of times what we'll do in this seminars, we'll ask everyone to introduce themselves. We have a pretty large group of people here, so that would take far too long. So what I would like to do, though, is find out kind of where people are from. So how many people are here from the UC system today? And they're all sitting together. Wow. That's fantastic. Thank you guys for being here. I think this is great that we have all of our systems. So from the CSU, do we have people? Okay, a couple of folks from the CSU. And then everyone else, community colleges? All right, now how many of you actually work in a veterans center where you are? Okay, fantastic. Good, good, good. Would you like to disclose that you're a veteran? If you would, raise your hand as well. One vet here. All right. 2 veterans here. Okay, fantastic. Well, that's good, actually. And the reason that it's good that we have just a couple of veterans in here is because one of the reasons that this program was put together was because we recognize that the majority of people that work in colleges and universities in the entire United States have never served in the military. And yet, we have all these military students or veteran students that are in the classroom that have a different experience prior to going into colleges and universities than the rest of the students. So we wanted to try to have a program that would build awareness of what it meant to be a veteran and a veteran student. So that was kind of the point that we started this. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to talk a little bit about the program. We're going to give you kind of a statistics overview, veterans by the numbers. And then we're going to talk about why people join the service. And then our Military 101 is kind of a military culture primer. We're going to talk about the kinds of things that happen when people are in the service. We'll take a little break so everyone can go and use the facilities or get some more coffee. And then we're going to talk about challenges for veterans in higher education. We're going to do something we call a status exercise. Now, what that is kind of a realization that there are many people that are veterans in our schools that don't want to be identified or don't want to identify themselves, which is why I asked the question, if you'd like to identify yourself as a veteran, raise your hand. Okay, so we're going to talk about the reasons why, and we're going to actually have you think about the reasons you may or may not identify yourself as a veteran if you were one. We're going to talk about how our systems are helping veterans, talk about some of the things you need to be aware of when working with veterans in your school, and then we'll talk about what it means to be an ally. So that will go through the 3 hours that we have together this morning. So first, what's this program? It's a faculty and staff awareness program that's designed to do a few things. Educate members of the university or college campus about what it means to be a veteran. The idea is to foster a supportive atmosphere for veterans on our campuses, and then to establish a network of visible allies for veterans. And the way that we do that is, at the end of today, for everyone that's been here for the entire seminar, we'll give you a decal that looks like this, and then invite you to put that on your office space. Now, this may sound familiar to some of you who have been through an LGBT safe zone or some other kind of safe space program, and that's because that's the model that we used. And the idea is you take people who are not part of a certain community, educate them about that community, and then have them put some kind of visible indicator that they support that population of students on the campus. So that's what we're here for today. Now, normally we would have a student panel in our 4-hour seminar, but we know that everyone went to the student panel yesterday morning, which was a fantastic panel anyway, so we're using that as part of this presentation as well. Okay, I do want to talk a little bit about confidentiality. Now, when we have a student panel, this is even more important than it is today. So I'm going to read this, and it says, one of the most important aspects of being a VetNet ally is that you're entrusted with providing an atmosphere of safety to those that come to you. In the simplest terms, VetNet ally confidentiality means that what a student says to you is confidential and stays with you. Okay, now the reason that that's important is because when you do put a decal up on your office space that says, I support vets, you might have someone come and talk to you about their experience. And they deserve confidentiality when that happens, unless, of course, they're telling you something that suggests that they plan to do harm to themselves or to other people, in which case all the confidentiality rules fly out the window. So that's part of it. The other part is you're going to be talking to each other today, and we want you to feel that you can share your own thoughts, your own feelings about military service or whatever here, and know that what happens in this room stays in this room. Okay? Now, it also says that you'll be getting information in the VetNet Ally Handbook. What I'm going to ask you to do is give us your business card, and I will actually email you a PDF version of the handbook. It's actually many pages, and we're trying to be green and not copy them all out. So we will send that to you in a PDF format. Okay, before we start, we have to talk about who is a veteran. Now, there are a couple of people here that said they were veterans, but how would you define veteran? I can't hear you. I'll be Phil Donahue.
They served in the military.
They served in the military. Actually, it's exactly that simple. It is someone who has served in the service. Now, sometimes we talk about combat vets versus non-combat vets, and from an educational perspective, we're really not concerned about that. A vet is a vet is a vet. They have the same benefits. But that doesn't mean that they don't have a different experience and that they're not going to bring that different experience into the classroom. We want to be aware of that as well. Now, veteran really means that they've served in any one of these services. And we have 5 armed forces in the United States. We have the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Air Force, and then we have the Coast Guard. Now, who can tell me what's different about the Coast Guard than all the other services? You are the quietest group I have ever seen in my entire life. Go ahead.
Okay, they're not part, well, they are part of our defense, but they're a separate portion of it.
You're so very close, but not quite there. Yes.
Part of Homeland Security.
They're part of the Department of Homeland Security. Exactly. The other 4 are part of the Department of Defense, but the Coast Guard is part of the Department of Homeland Security. But they can be activated as part of the Navy during a time of conflict. And there are many people that serve in the Coast Guard that have been in Afghanistan and Iraq over the last decade as well. We need to be aware of that. But they are a little bit different in that they fall under a different kind of command. That said, they get all the same benefits. They still fall under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, just like the other services do. Now, the other term that we'll use sometimes is service member. And the difference between a veteran and a service member is that the service member is continuing to serve right now. They could be serving in a couple of different ways. They could be on active duty, meaning that's their life, 24/7. They serve in the military. They live on a base or around a base. They work there. They probably recreate there. It's all encompassing. On the other hand, we have reservists, and those are folks who sign up so that they can serve in their local community 1 weekend a month and a couple of weeks out of the year, traditionally. In the last decade or so, what they've found is that they're winding up getting activated and going over to Iraq or Afghanistan or somewhere else in the world so another active unit can go to Iraq or Afghanistan, and they're spending more than just a couple of weeks a year and the weekend. Okay? But ideally, they serve in a reserve capacity in their local community. All right. Having said all that, I want to introduce Pat O'Rourke again, and he's going to talk about veterans by the numbers.
2 devices. Oh, we're in trouble. So in higher education and many other industries, we spend some amount of time taking a look at quantitative data. And by the numbers is an attempt to expose you to just some facts. Some of you have seen them. Give you an idea, kind of an overview. We'll start with some macro numbers, and then we'll go down to some micro numbers. And the micro numbers are based off of my dissertation, in which I presented a survey to 3 different California community colleges to better understand how military service affects student veteran persistence. And we don't go deep into the dissertation or the analysis that is part of that investigation, but we do see some descriptive data that hopefully will give you an idea, will lend to an argument or to a representation of the state of student veterans in a higher education. So 1.4 million. Now this isn't different, real different, than the early 90s before we went into Gulf War I. Similar numbers, but these were recently updated, and we noticed a change of 60,000 service members that are now no longer part of the Department of Defense, of the active military service. So, kid you not, looking at data now and in the future, and even in the past, is going to help us understand some of the trends. Don't kid yourself, we're in a reduction in force mode in the Department of Defense, and if anybody has paid attention to sequestration and some of the caustic cuts that the Department of Defense will experience, if we're unable to come together and pass some type of legislation to allow a smooth budget reduction from the Department of Defense, we could see some fairly major cuts very, very quickly, which means people are going to be out of the service very, very quickly. So I'm not predicting anything. I have no crystal ball, but just remember, looking at the numbers is always important. Some other data, 14% of the population of the U.S. are made up of veterans. Of course, we know from many different articles that really is about 1% of the population that's carried the burden of combat, of war for the last 12, almost 13 years. Secretary of California Department of Veterans Affairs, Pete Gravitt, would tell you we have 2 million veterans in the state. I wanted to go right to a data point, a data source, so I used the VetPop, the vet population material that the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs projects as for veterans as of September, I think, 2013. And that is the number in the breakout. Are there 2 million? Well, sure, but I'm going to use these data points. What's interesting, though, is if you look at Southern California, aside from the San Antonio area and some other areas in Texas, this is really one of the largest gatherings of veterans in the United States. This slide hopefully just kind of lets you know about the number of participants. Of course, what it doesn't do is it doesn't show you the duration of the actual conflict. And to imagine that just 4 million individuals have been responsible for about for more than 12 years of warfare in the Middle East and South Asia is kind of overwhelming. And this is the cost. I think some of us think about over 50,000 killed in Vietnam during that conflict. This conflict is much different. I think wounds in this conflict come from primarily, many of them from improvised explosive devices like Colonel Jackson, Dr. Jackson talked about, and her team of people who are running convoy escorts. This is a tough number. 58,000 is a tough number. But think of the ones that haven't self-identified or even personally committed themselves to recovering from their experience that they may or may not accept. So these are reported. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious, are suicides categorized there? And if so, what?
Yeah, no, we have some information on suicides. We've stayed away from the topic of suicides. I think last year's U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, I think it was 2013 or late 2012, where they came out with a report that was stark. But we don't spend a lot of time presenting on that, primarily because you could do an entire 4-hour presentation on suicide awareness and suicides within the Department of Defense, and then how we're unwilling to track suicides among veterans, particularly in this state. This was one of the few states that didn't contribute to the Veterans Affairs report, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Texas, again, the second most veteran populous state, only contributed partial data. So we stay away from that. I think we're not out to throw stones at anybody, but there's definitely, just to respond to you, not a lot of data that we present here, although we do have, I think, our Veterans Prevail data. You'll see it's 2009, 2008 data on suicides, but that of course has changed significantly since 2012. A breakdown of the services. I think it's pretty fair to say that for combat operations, we've seen the Army and the Marine Corps spend a lot of time in country, but those units have been short of support. And so we've also had Navy and Air Force participating with boots on the ground in a number of different ways. Breakdown of ages. I don't think it's any secret the closer you get to retirement, the more you want to stay in at 20 years. Some of the new equations I'm less familiar with, but with my peer crowd, if you stay in for 20 years, you receive a pension of half your base pay at the end, as well as medical support. So that's why you see this 9% just hanging in there. Men and women, 85-15, something like that. You'll see this is fairly consistent. We always like to show this just because it's higher education and we kind of want to understand the ethnic breakout of our veterans or of our service members. Many of us who have served say, gosh, we're all green, or we're all blue. We like to believe that. Are there racial tensions in the service? Probably. Sometimes, sure. We're all part of society and maybe some of the stuff that goes along with society, but the idea of teamwork sometimes transcends, most of the time transcends the color or background of an individual.
Is there a branch that perhaps the numbers might shift a little bit?
I don't know. That's a real good question. I really don't know that. That would be something very interesting to look at. Well, thanks. That's probably something I'll try to sniff out.
Write that down right now.
Yes.
It would also be interesting to do a comparison between the percentages of the U.S. that make up these different ethnicities.
I can speak to that. Actually, it's really close.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
I bet it's close.
It's really close. Actually, where we see kind of a reversal is in the Latino or Hispanic population and the African American population. And those numbers are a little bit off from the US overall, but that's pretty close.
To show the comparison would be cool, because we don't know what those numbers are.
Sure. In the past, of course, this is a Long Beach State program, and in the past, we've taken a look at Long Beach State student representation, and sometimes we change. In fact, almost every time we change our slides, just because we're so bored presenting the same material, and we know that numbers change, data changes, and we need to keep an eye out on those data. Somebody else had a question? No? Okay. All right. Yeah. Perfect. Well, instead, I came up with a different slide. To me, this means more to me than anything else is that we've seen an increase in representation among ethnic minorities in our military services. I think this says a lot. There may be a reason for that. We don't have Dr. Mike Barraza here, but he will tell you about his story. In fact, I think you're going to tell the story anyway.
I will now.
Okay, well, set him up for that spike. I'm sure you're going to tell it perfectly. A Latin man, Mexican background, shares some very, very clear feelings about why he joined the service. And it had to do with his feeling of commitment to the country and some political things that were going on that pushed in the faces of Mexican Americans in this country the fact that they weren't carrying their load as Americans. And he said, you know, that's part of my decision, is I'm going to carry that load. So again, it's interesting. It's not some of the other slides, but we'll definitely include those. Education, and that's why we're here, to understand the dynamics. Interesting, a higher high school graduate average than the United States. You know, the misconception is that, oh yeah, well, you know, you're a felon, therefore you have to go into the Army. No, not the case. It's actually opposite of that. Any type of crime or any scar on your record, you won't be accepted, and that's the bottom line. And as forces draw down, it will become more and more competitive. Now, I just saw an email the other day, and it's a little bit off track here. The Air Force said to all their ROTC, graduating ROTC students for the Air Force ROTC across the campuses in the United States, if you don't want to go on active duty, you don't have to. And that scholarship, don't worry about paying it. And that's where we're at with cutting the force. So I've never seen anything like it. Take a look at, question?
Yeah, hi, thank you very much. I have a question, it was on your slide with the ethnicity in the military.
Sure.
And said it similarly matches U.S. population demographics. And I was wondering if you had that same information for enlisted versus officers, and whether that also matched U.S. population demographics.
You know, we could do that. One of the challenges about this seminar is that we race to get this information to you, and if we present too much, we won't finish. And we have not finished on time. It's never popular, but no, thank you. I mean, literally, what we do is we pick and choose, but the officer data would be equally as important, for sure, for sure. Yes?
Hi, just commenting on this slide, just recently I did a presentation at my college, and I don't remember what my source was, but the incidence of bachelor's degrees and advanced degrees was higher with American military than the general population, not lower. And, I mean, I don't remember where I got it.
Sure.
US Census or the Veterans Affairs Administration site. But I remember, I was actually surprised. I wasn't surprised about high school diploma.
So these data come from a Time magazine article that was done about the 1%, and it was
2011.
yeah, 2011. It was a good article. Some of this may have changed, but I don't think it's changed that much. I think the author derived much of his data from Pew Center statistics. So maybe we go back and chase down those data, but we're pretty sure, and one of the reasons why is in this bachelor's degree section is that many of these individuals leave high school and join the service. They delay their education. They delay getting a baccalaureate degree. And that's why we're involved in this process, is to make sure that now that they've served their country, they can get back in, deal with their experience from the intensity of the Department of Defense, and reclaim something that most of their peers have already done, right? So that they're at least on the same playing field, the same level playing field. So, and then of course advanced degrees. I can tell you from personal experience, I mean this is pretty close, but definitely the officer corps. If you don't have a graduate degree, by the time you're a major, you're at risk for a promotion to lieutenant colonel or colonel, or movement up the hierarchical, scale of promotions in the services. And just another way to look at the breakdown of active duty personnel and their education. So now we'll dive down into the case study. I'd love to have the 2011, 2012 and more current data. I couldn't get that. Sometimes you get what you get and you have to smile. But this came straight out of the Chancellor's office of the California Community College. So I think it's fairly obvious that we're seeing an increase in GI Bill beneficiaries at the community college level. And again, these are the ones who are leveraging the GI Bill. This isn't the ones who are back in with mom and dad, or they're hunkering down and they have some resources saved from service. Maybe some of their combat pay that was non-taxable has been saved and they're not using. They're delaying their GI Bill usage. So tagging data is absolutely essential. Asking on an application, like CSU Mentor asks 3 questions about being a veteran. I've asked them to relook at that and say, look, roll out a whole nother page when they hit that button and they self-identify. I've got some other things I want to know. And we do need to know, because it's from that knowledge that we can develop qualitative. We can ask them, we can survey them, we can talk to them, we can double check, but we can also implement best practices based on that. So kind of here's a little bit of a roll-up. 3 California community colleges in Region 8. Total number of veterans, 1,354, based on campus populations that were being tracked. Again, these are individuals who self-identified and or were using GI Bill benefits that the campuses could count. From the data that you're going to see, just over a 19% response rate. Not super impressive. I wish it would have been more, but you get what you get. So this discussion about parents and the influence of our parents is kind of an important one, and I just wanted to break down a little bit about that. If you understand that 41% are first-generation college students, sometimes we miss that point. We miss the fact that these individuals will behave in different ways, and in some cases, when you talk about academic integration, they may actually look kind of like a traditional student. In other ways, of course, they'll be non-traditional students. And that's usually social integration and psychological outcomes and those type of things, as well as how they use their time. Age 34, the mean age, kind of high, but we had some older veterans who sent that statistic upwards. And these were Vietnam-era veterans who were participating in the VRAP program, which is kind of an occupational assistance program, educational occupational assistance program that the VA has recently established. Kind of set our numbers off a little bit. 50% as a student have access to some form of VA healthcare. Interesting finding, very different male and female high school GPAs. The respondents in the surveys show clearly a significant difference. However, by the time that they were participating in their occupational training within the military services, males kind of jumped up and said, I guess I'm gonna perform. I'm gonna become more academically aligned or enthusiastic or achievement oriented, until when we asked them to report their college GPA. Although female veterans reported a higher GPA, it's not significant, not significantly higher. More than 50% combat veterans, I think that's been very consistent in most of the surveys I've done, whether it was at Long Beach State or other places, we're seeing about 50%. And then, of course, full-time, part-time breakdown. We've seen something similar to this. And then ethnicity. So these are a little bit different than the slide I previously showed talking about the active duty service. And again, why? California community colleges, Southern California, that's why. This is a breakdown of the respondents and their ethnic backgrounds. And then, of course, their goals. Again, 66% looking for a four-year institution, others with other objectives. And from here, I think we'll do the Vets Prevail. I should say that there's some interesting, how many people have seen the Vets Prevail YouTube? No? Okay. So there's some data that it may make you uncomfortable, but I think most of us can weather through that, I hope. But if it does, we have some clips in here also of combat that you may feel uncomfortable about. I warn you, just as a common courtesy. So. The Veterans Prevail video that you just saw is a product of an office within the office of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Actually, the Department of Defense created that video because they realize that there's not enough awareness out there, and I think they probably did a pretty good job. As I said, some of the data in that presentation, in fact, you can Google that and find that presentation online very easily. But some of it is outdated, especially the 2009 suicide data, which is some believe is all the way up to as many as 25 to 30 veterans a day committing suicide that go unaccounted for. So more numbers for you. And I think we have a short break here as we power up.
All right. So we obviously know that a lot of people have joined the military. We want to talk now about why people do, what drives them to do so. So the purpose of this is to really highlight the different reasons why people choose to join the military. But first, how many people join the U.S. military in the United States every year? This is when you get to talk to me. How many people? 2,000 join? No, way higher than that. I heard something over here. 500,000? Too high. 10,000? Oh, way more than 10,000. More than 100,000. Closer. All right, I'll just tell you. 210,000 people a year, almost 211,000 people a year join the service. Now, this actually breaks it down by active duty reserves, how many by service, and you can see kind of the sizes of the services as well. The Marine Corps is the smallest of the services. We don't have the Coast Guard information in here, but you can see that also in how many people join and then how many stay. And there's a lot of reasons why we need that many people, right? First off, about 2 years ago, that number was 270,000, which is an indication that the services are indeed getting smaller. So why do you need 210,000 people, 211,000 people a year to join the service? Well, there's a lot of reasons. One is that the majority of people go in the service for 4 years and they get out. You got to replace them. Other people, like Pat, spend 20 years, 22 years in the service. They retire. You've got to replace those. And unfortunately, over the last decade, we've had several thousand people who have lost their lives while they're in the service, and those folks also have to be replaced. And then you have the people we don't really think about, the ones who didn't make it through boot camp, or they got let go early, things like that. Again, all those people have to be replaced. The services are required by law to have a certain number of people, and that's why they do all of that recruiting. So, you guys all know how to play Jeopardy, right? What are the rules of Jeopardy? Right. I give you the answer, you give me the question, right? So, here we go. Sorry, I'm not going to sing the song for you, but here it is. The percentage of people who enlist in the U.S. military from California in 2010. What is 50%? Wow. No. What is 25%? Still a little bit high. The answer is 11%. So 11% of the people that join the military do so from the state of California. Now, why is that important for you to know that? Well, that's a bunch of people, right? They're going to go and they're going to serve in the military and they're going to get out. And what do you think they're going to do when they get out? They're going to come home to California, right? So, where are they going to come when they come home? Where are the community college folks again? Raise your hands. They're coming to you because they need to go get their education, the GI Bill, all that kind of stuff. Now, that's that 11%. But there's another group of people we have to be concerned about as well. And those are the people like me who were, let's say, displaced by their families when they were really young and moved away from California and grew up in someplace like, I don't know, Oklahoma, right? And then joined the Marine Corps, maybe. Just theoretically, that could happen, right? Hypothetically. And then wound up stationed at Camp Pendleton, and every morning woke up and opened the barracks door and saw the Pacific Ocean in front of them. And then they got out of the Marine Corps and said, do I go back to Oklahoma or do I stay in California? Did you guys see the sunset last night? All right, so we stay in California. So that means that the population of veterans in California is growing because people that came from California are staying here when they get out or coming back when they get out. And people that come from someplace else are also staying in California. So that number grows. And because of the job situation and because of the really great benefit of the post 9/11 GI Bill, people are going to the community colleges, which is why we have, what, 45,000 people that are veterans in the community colleges. So very important to know that. Why do people join? Is it the great recruiting posters? I've selected a few, kind of World War II-ish and up to the 80s. That just makes you want to go join, doesn't it? Or if you're a woman, maybe you want to join the WAC because it's your war too, right? Or everybody's favorite, good old Uncle Sam, right? All right. Well, why are the reasons that people join? What are the reasons people join?
Educational benefit.
I heard it. Educational benefit. Okay, what else?
Get away from the parents.
Get away from your parents. Absolutely. Discipline. Being patriotism. Absolutely. Adventure. Absolutely. Didn't the Navy used to say it's not just a job, it's an adventure? Absolutely. Absolutely. What else? Family tradition. Wow, you guys have seen this slide before, haven't you? All right, so there's a lot of reasons. And actually, it's usually not one single reason, but there is that sense of adventure, especially since 9/11, patriotism has been a huge driving factor. People want to serve the country because of the events of 9/11. Family tradition. There are families that can trace a history of service generation by generation going all the way back to the Revolutionary War. Okay? I think the famous example of that is Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump, right? What was he so angry about? Do you remember? He wanted to die on the battlefield like someone in every generation had done. So obviously that's an extreme example, but that family tradition is a big deal. Also, a rite of passage. American culture really doesn't have many rites of passage, but you know, the Army will provide one for you. It's called boot camp. Okay? Change of environment. People want to get away from the parents. In fact, one of the things we don't think about a lot when we think about veterans and mental health in particular is that sometimes those folks that have gotten out of the service and they have PTSD and things like that, they may have gone into the service with that based on a bad family experience that they had, a bad economic experience that they had. So sometimes that change of environment is really, really important to them, and they're seeking that out by going in the military. Career preparation, very important thing. And usually the economic incentive is something that is tied in with all of the rest of them. It's a job. It pays reasonably well. There are all of the health benefits. One of my student veterans told me that the reason he joined the Air Force was because he and his partner were about to have a baby. And he knew that he couldn't afford it on the outside, but by joining the Air Force, he knew his child would be covered fully for health benefits right away. The day he went to boot camp, his family was covered. So there are a lot of reasons that really draw people towards the military. So you make the decision to join the military, whichever branch you choose. What happens when you get there? Well, we usually do a student panel, and we ask, and Pat asked one of our students, so, we talk a lot about transitioning out of the service, but what was the transition into the service like? And she said, there's no transition into the service. One day you're not in the service, the next day you are. That's it. So we're going to talk a little bit about the culture and lifestyle in the military, and I do want to say this, I'm painting with a very broad brush here because every person's experience is going to be different. If you've ever met a veteran, you've met one veteran. And even if they have the same training and all of that, their view of it is going to be different. But we can still talk about culture and lifestyle in this way. Now, my field of study when I was working on my master's degree was linguistics. So language is really important to me. And I'm looking at videos, trying to figure out what we want to kind of show in our presentation here. And I come across a video of a platoon in boot camp and a drill instructor explaining to them all the new things they were going to call the things that they had already called something else. We're going to rename everything here, right? And it was funny to watch. But here are some of the terms that we want to talk about today. Now, we don't have a lot of people that were in the military, but those of you that were, you do not get to answer these questions. What is a bulkhead? What's that? Well, you can't tell if you remember my presentation. Perhaps I didn't tell the rules properly. You weren't in the military. But you're correct. It's a wall. Why is it called a wall? Well, it's only called a wall if you're in one of the naval services, the Marine Corps, the Navy, or the Coast Guard, because a wall in a ship is called a bulkhead. Pat, what do they call a wall in the Army?
A wall.
Right. All right. So that leads us to our next thing. What is a porthole? It's a window. Now, a lot of times when we think porthole, we think about this little round thing in a ship. Well, if you're in the naval service, it doesn't matter. Anything is a window if it's a window. It doesn't matter what shape it is. Pat, what do they call a window?
Yeah, a window, right?
Window. Okay. So, they just can't teach them long words. Porthole, bulkhead, wall, window. Yeah. Anyway, so what's a deck? Could be the ship. I like to say it's anything you can do a push-up on. That could be called a deck. Horizontal-ish surface, right? A ship, the ground, whatever. Now, when you're in the military, you can't just go to lunch. You have to go have chow, right? You don't go on vacation. You go on leave. What's a cover? It's a hat, right? And you would call every hat that you wear in the military a cover, except for those Smokey Bear hats that the drill instructors wear, and that's actually a campaign hat. But everything else is a cover. And you don't want to call it a hat. Someone will definitely tell you called it the wrong thing. You can't go to the bathroom if you're in the military services, or the real military, the Marine Corps. No, if you're in the naval services, you go make a head call, or you go to the head because that's what a restroom is called on a ship. Or if you're in the Army and the Air Force, it's some French kind of word, I guess, latrine, right? Okay, what are colors? It's a flag, right? It's actually the U.S. flag. The other flags can be called colors as well, but it's more than that. It's actually a ceremony that happens every morning and every afternoon. So every morning the flag goes up on all the bases around the country, and it happens at 8 o'clock in the morning, so it's pretty standard. In the afternoon, it has to come down. What time does it come down? It comes down actually at sunset. So each day it's a little bit different time. Now, if you live on a military base, or if you're on a military base, you want to know what time the flag is going to come down. Because as the flag is coming down, or as it's being raised, everything stops. Music plays. I'm not exaggerating. Actually, music plays on loudspeakers. And you must stop, face the flagpole, and salute if you're in a uniform. If you're not in a uniform, you just stand there at the position of attention. So when colors is going on, where do you want to be? Standing out on the sidewalk, saluting by yourself? No, you want to be sitting inside in an office, looking out the porthole, watching someone else doing that, right? So people try to stay inside during that. I mean, even if you're driving your car, you have to stop the car and sit at the position of attention. Although that's never been well defined for me. I'm not sure what that means. But you have to sit there. So colors is very important. Now, obviously, this is just a very small little bit of military terminology. If you would like to learn more, I'd like to recommend a book purchase for you, Dictionary of Military Terms. It's only 768 pages long. It's some good reading to put yourself to sleep at night. You get it on Amazon.com. Okay, now, the other thing about military culture is names. Now, there are a bunch of you here from community colleges. I'd like you to raise your hand right now if you are a community college counselor. Okay, hold your hand up. You guys are the best advisors I've ever seen. How many of you did I just like make the hair on the back of your neck raise? All your hands are still up, right? You hate being called advisor, right? Because you're counselors. You get a degree in counseling and all that kind of stuff. That name is important to you, right? Same thing is true in the military. So let's look at this person right here. This gentleman is in the Army. What will we call him because he's in the Army? So yes, in the Army we call him a soldier. Marine Corps? Call them Marines, right? Now, these are probably the two most important distinctions that we can make because these two groups of people are the most competitive groups of people with one another. Soldiers do not want to be called Marine, and Marines do not want to be called soldiers. So these Marines, they don't get called Marine until they graduate from boot camp. So it's very important, that name to them, right? So in the Navy, we typically would call people sailors. Now, that is actually only part of the issue there. They have a very, very hierarchical structure in the Navy. And naval officers would be called officers, and the sailors would be called something else. And the chiefs would be called chiefs. They actually change uniforms when they hit these different levels. So very important to know that as well. In the Air Force, airman is the name they're beginning to be called. Yes, it's not, or no, it's not a gender-neutral term for those of you that are already thinking that. I get that a lot. That's because it's actually one of the ranks is called airman. Coast Guard, Guardians, Coasties is a term of endearment they've used for a long time as well, and some of them still like that. So the key here is this. If you really want to make your vet feel comfortable, find out what service they were in, use the correct terminology. Otherwise, use something very neutral like veteran, because calling everybody a soldier is really only hitting about 45–48% of the services. So very important to know that. Okay. The other part of military culture that's important is the idea of a chain of command. This is the rank structure of the U.S. Army. I do want to mention that in the middle here, there's actually something called warrant officers. We're not going to talk a lot about those folks. They're people that were enlisted who are specialists in their field, and then they can be promoted to an intermediate officer rank. But these are the primary ones that people serve in. The enlisted folks, the privates, the sergeants, sergeants major, they're the people that typically enlist in the service out of high school. Some will have degrees, most do not. And then we have the officers. These are folks that all definitely have at least a bachelor's degree. And as Pat said, once they get down here to captain or major, they're really starting to pursue graduate degrees, master's degrees, and increasingly doctorates as well. And you know, all the folks that are enlisted have to salute all the people that are officers, which is something we don't do on college campuses. Could you imagine you walking across campus and you have to salute the deans? Are there any deans in here? Yeah, wouldn't you like that a lot? It would be great. No? Okay. So, so that's an important thing. You know, saluting, it shows respect. Okay, respect for the office and the officers. But the other thing that's really important to know about the chain of command is it's pretty rigid, but it's also very visible. People wear their rank on their collar or their shoulder or somewhere on the uniform, so you always know where you stand in relation to the other people around you. You know if you're a corporal that guy that's a staff sergeant outranks you, okay? We don't have that in the civilian world, and we certainly don't have it on a college campus. You know, when I'm going out to community colleges and universities, if I dress like this on the campus, a student sees me walking across campus, who am I? I could be the president of the school, because they don't know who the president is for the most part, or I could be a student that's just trying to get a degree after work. You never know. But in the military, you definitely do know. And it's important to know where you stand. So think about it this way. If I'm a young private first class, and in the morning one day, I say, you know what, I really like to go to lunch early. So I go and I talk to my sergeant, and I say, I'm in the Army, so I say, hey, Sarge, can I go to lunch? They say Sarge in the Army. They don't do that in the Marine Corps. They'll kill you if you say Sarge. But I say, hey, can I go to lunch early? And the sergeant says, no, you can't. What does that mean? It means I'm not going to lunch early, right? So would it be okay for me to then say, well, I really do want to go to lunch early, so I think I'm going to go talk to the first sergeant and say, hey, first sergeant, can I go to lunch early? Would that be okay? What would happen if I did that? That sergeant is going to find me, and we're going to have a little one-on-one conversation that I am never going to forget. I will never ask a question again, right? Not going to be pretty. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because if I live in that kind of an environment for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, where I'm used to looking at someone in a position of authority, asking a question, accepting the answer, and then I go to the community college or the university and I walk up to the financial aid window and I say, I think I'm supposed to get this loan right here. And the person on the other side of the window says, no, you're not. What am I going to do? I'm going to turn around, I'm going to walk away, I'm going to grumble profanities underneath my breath, just like I did when the sergeant said you can't go to lunch early. But what did that answer really mean? Well, it might have really meant no. It may have. but it might also have meant that that person didn't know that they could say yes. They didn't have the authority to say yes. And it would absolutely be appropriate for me to say, listen, I really appreciate your help, but can I talk to your supervisor because I think I'm supposed to get this, right? Well, our vets probably aren't going to do that unless we tell them that the chain of command at the university or the college is something that's useful to them and that it's okay to go ahead and take the next step up as long as they do so politely. The financial aid person is not going to chase them across campus and have that conversation that the sergeant might have. That's not going to happen. Okay, now, once you've learned all of your ranks for the Army, this is what we want to take a look at very briefly because this is the rank structure of all the different services. Can you imagine having to know all of that and where you stand? Pretty confusing, and yet so very linear and rigid at the same time. Okay, so we talk about customs and courtesies. Here we have people from the different services rendering some sort of salute. We have a Marine saluting the President, getting off of Marine One. We have a sailor saluting. We have some airmen saluting. And then we have, on the right-hand side, a soldier who's standing guarding the Tomb of the Unknowns. Now, the reason that I show this slide is because I really want to talk a little bit about uniforms, because it's one of the things that people in the service, or who've gotten out of the service, are at first super happy that they never have to wear again. Right? I don't have to wear that stupid uniform again. I can wear whatever I want. And then a couple years later, if you ask them, most of them will say, yeah, I kind of miss wearing the uniform. Right? Okay? Some of us don't fit in our uniforms anymore, so we really miss it a lot. But there's a lot that you can tell about somebody by looking at their uniform, because there's history in the uniform. And there's two kinds. One is the history of the individual, and the other is the history of the service. The history of the individual is worn in their ribbons and their badges and their rank. And you can tell a lot by looking at someone wearing a uniform. You can tell if they've been overseas. You can tell if they've been particularly good at what they do. You can tell if they have served in combat, if they've been injured in combat, if they have served with valor, all by looking at their ribbons. You can tell if they're a scuba diver or a skydiver by looking at their badges. You can tell how much they make by looking at their rank. You can tell how long they've been in the service by how many hash marks they have on their sleeves. So all of that personal history is worn, and it's evident, and it's visible, and it's worn with pride. And then you go into the college, and you're wearing shorts and flip-flops and T-shirts like everyone else, and nobody knows about you at all anymore, and you don't know about them. So it's kind of a missing element. The other part of the uniform is a history of the service itself. And every single little detail of all these uniforms have some historical significance. The red stripe on the Marine Corps trousers represents blood. It's actually called a blood stripe, and that is the blood of those that have fallen before you. And you only get that when you become a corporal or a non-commissioned officer and above. I knew a warrant officer one time who had been in the Marine Corps for a really long time, and he said, you know, when I got corporal, all I wanted to do was get promoted to sergeant. So if I got busted again, I wouldn't lose my blood stripe. Because if he got demoted back down below that, he would lose that red stripe down his trousers. So very important. And then there's, you know, even the color of the uniform has historical significance. The coats on the dress blues of the Army and the Marine Corps are very dark, almost black, and the trousers are very light blue. Have you ever noticed that? Have you ever wondered why? You should look it up. So anyway. It's actually because of the history of those uniforms. And I guess the best way to talk about it is from the perspective of the Army dress blues. It really goes back to the old cavalry uniforms that the soldiers wore when they were riding across the central plains of what would become the United States. And they had these uniforms that they would wear, but on horseback, it's really hot and it's really dusty, and you would take your jacket off and kind of stow it away in your saddlebags, and you wouldn't wear it. But you're still wearing your trousers, and they're getting faded by the sun and by the dirt and all that kind of stuff while your jacket is protected. So you put it on and they're a different color. Likewise, the Marine Corps uniform used to have a really high leather collar, which they kind of keep the resemblance of that with a high collar now. Super uncomfortable to wear. The leather collar was there to protect them from saber blows when they were fighting on ships. But you're not going to wear it every day, so just like the soldiers, they put their blouse, their jacket, below decks where it is protected, and their trousers faded. So we retain that today in those uniforms. Interestingly, if you look at generals, their dark blouse matches their very dark pants. Why? Well, generals, they can afford new clothes, right? And they were probably the ones back in the tent, not the one riding the horse all over the place. So their uniforms change color, actually, once they get promoted to the level of general. Okay, camaraderie is something that your student veterans probably talk about missing a lot. And even if they don't say it using the term camaraderie, though some will, you'll notice it as soon as they get together. You can tell that something has been missing from their lives, and they just start talking in a way that you haven't heard them talk before when they get together. The telephone pole that the soldiers are holding up there says teamwork. The Blue Angels flying together just impresses me. I'm shocked that you can fly 400 miles an hour, 18 inches away from another airplane. You got to trust people, right? Obviously, a combat situation is someplace where camaraderie is built in a way that those of us who haven't been in combat will never understand. And then, of course, we have all of the services holding their colors here. And I love that photo because, you know, Pat and I rib each other about Army, Marine Corps, and all that. And that's just kind of the veteran experience or the military experience. But in the end, we all recognize that we're all on the same team. And I think that represents it really better than anything else. I just love this photo here. This is the old guard standing in front of the tomb of the unknown soldier. They've been there 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, since 1948. That's pretty impressive. Those are the kind of people that are going to your schools right now. Now, they may not have all stood in front of the tomb of the unknowns, but they have served with that level of commitment, and I think it's important to know. This became a really popular picture during the Superstorm Sandy because you may remember that people in Washington, D.C. were evacuating. These guys did not. They still stood out there and stood guard even at that time. So, very impressive group of people. All right, well, how do you get there? You have to learn all of this culture, and the way the services teach it is through boot camp. And the idea is that you want to develop the physical, the mental, the emotional traits necessary for people to go in combat situations. And all the services have some form of boot camp. They tailor them to the unique and individual needs of their services, really to develop the culture of their own service as well. The idea really in all of them, though, is that the self is replaced by the idea of team. And as I mentioned before, this is something that is kind of a rite of passage. And with that, I want to show you a video of boot camp. Any guesses what service I might show?
Surprise us.
You would surprise.
This is Paris Island, Marine Corps Recruit Depot. The transition from civilian into Marine starts right here.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I'm Private First Class Lund, Alpha Company, United States Marine Corps. I joined the Marine Corps because it's the #1 most respected branch of service. I've always wanted to do something with my life, and I've always set high goals.
Providence of Barron is the key, do you understand me?
Yes, sir.
When you join, you don't exactly know what's going to happen.
Yes, sir.
Onto the island, and everybody on the bus was scared, and Drill Sergeant came on the bus and was yelling at us to get off when we ran and got in the yellow footprints.
Now, what you're gonna do, you're gonna get out and get on my yellow footprint. You understand that? Yes, sir. Scream out. Yes, sir.
And I was shaking when I actually got here. I was nervous that I wouldn't make it, nervous that it would be too hard, but not nervous enough to where it would keep me from completing it.
Yes, sir.
The drill instructors push you to your limit because they show you what it's like to be in a combat environment.
Kick the head with the elbows. Keep it with the elbows.
This morning is going to be the graduation ceremony for Alpha Company and November Company, 5 platoons of males. November Company has 2 female platoons. We'll all graduate together.
My name is Private First Class Haynes. I'm so happy and so excited. To become a United States Marine, honestly, is the best thing in the world. I can't imagine anything I could have done better.
When we say Marine Corps, it gives me chills because of what it means, because of the history behind the Marine Corps.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to Parris Island and this morning's graduation ceremony. I'd like to take the next few moments and talk to you about these young Marines standing before you today. They arrived on Parris Island over 12 weeks ago, blurry-eyed, scared, disoriented, yet eager to start recruit training.
When it comes to recruit training, of course it's hard, but where would you be if you stayed home?
The last 12 weeks have been one of the toughest in my life. Even though it was tough, what got me through was the motivation from my family and from my girlfriend to be proud that they can call me a Marine.
As you leave Parris Island today, understand the pride and honor of our Corps rests personally and squarely on your shoulders. Serve proudly and with distinction. You are our future. Ladies and gentlemen, I proudly present to you our nation's newest and finest United States Marine.
It's gonna be a good feeling to leave, but you're gonna miss the atmosphere, you're gonna miss all the recruits. You get such strong bonds with the other Marines because you have to work as a team. Teamwork is essential in the Marine Corps.
That's what the sisterhood and the brotherhood is about. It's about respect, just like a family. It is a family.
So proud of you.
We're proud of him. He's made us proud the whole time. We were looking forward to this day for some time. Just glad we're here.
Leave the best for last.
It's done. I'm so happy and overwhelmed. I'm happy that it's done, but sad at the same time. But now we just get to move on to the next step and the next chapter in our careers.
Okay, so I should say, this is my disclaimer, that's the pretty side of boot camp. If you would like to see more, there's lots online. Actually, the reason I chose it is because I think it really hits on the themes. If you listen to the announcer talking about the responsibility that's being placed on a new generation to carry on the burden of the whole history of, an organization that's over 230 years old. So very important, and also because it shows that there are men and women both that are in training. I think that video shows that very well. Of course, life in the service is not all about boot camp. That's just the initial phase. It really is a job. People go to work every day. They get paid. They have benefits. They have holidays and vacations. They wear uniforms. Physical fitness is part of the culture. So all of that stuff goes on. It's an adventure, People go all over the world, In the recent decade, they've been going to very dangerous places, but they've been going to other places that are not dangerous, that are kind of exotic. And I liked the panel yesterday when someone said, I felt like I was an ambassador of the United States going to these different places in the world. So very important. Constantly training for whatever's going to happen next, and that's really part of it. It's a duty. You have all those customs and courtesies. You have that rigid hierarchy that you live within. And then, of course, leadership training and experience and camaraderie. All that is part of this experience that people have. So when you get out, it's definitely a lifestyle change. You have to become a civilian. And frankly, for people in the military, civilians are not really highly respected because look at us. We're not that in shape, right? I know I'm speaking for myself. We're not in shape. We don't have a sense of shared purpose, right? It's not as orderly. There's not a mission-driven thing. So what do you do when you have looked at yourself as being kind of apart, and now you are a civilian again? What does that mean? You have to redefine that. You lose the camaraderie. You have to choose your next job. You have to get a job, right? You have to choose what to wear. I talked about uniforms. You can't dress in a uniform every day. No one's going to tell you what to wear. You have to find your own housing. You have to eat. You can't just go to the chow hall anymore. And if you think McDonald's is your chow hall, well, I think I already talked about physical fitness. Okay? So But you also become a veteran, which for some people means intense pride in their service. And you know those students. They're the ones that are wearing the Army t-shirt to school every day. And then you have people that are never going to talk about it. There's silence. And then there's that kind of band of brothers that links people together. And with an increasing number of women in the service, maybe we're going to have to call it something different, a band of siblings. But it is a family, however you want to look at it. You have to become a student, choose a major, select your own courses. No one's going to tell you what to take. You have to study in a different way. And as Pat showed, oftentimes our vets study much better than they did when they were in high school because their standard has been reset while they were in the military. I know my own personal GPA was 1.5 points higher when I went to college than it was in high school. Okay? Big difference. The other thing is questioning authority. Now this is something that is not something you want to do so much in the military. In certain instances you do and you have to and it can be interactive, but when you go and you sit down in that first English class and the professor says, well, what I'd like you to do today is I'd like you to question the author, dialogue with the author. And they're going, wait a minute, hold on. Tell me what I need to know, I'm going to know it. So we have to kind of transition them into a different kind of higher ed environment. And they have to be a fellow student. If you're a 24-year-old student who's been in a combat situation and you're now in a psychology class with 100 other students, you're probably going to be sitting in the very back of the classroom and knowing where your exits are and all that kind of stuff for your own personal safety and so that you're not going to freak out if somebody walks up behind you and surprises you. So it's good for everyone. But from that vantage point, you see the other 99 students sitting there from the back. And what do they have open in front of them? Laptops, cell phones, all that kind of stuff. And you hear all the time, vets are really upset by how disrespectful that is to the instructor. And that said, there's probably a couple of vets sitting in the back on Facebook too, right? They're students as well. Okay. Now, finally, this is what it looks like to graduate when you're in the military. This is what it looks like to graduate at Cal State Long Beach. So our collective goal is really to get people to transition from what is on the left to this one right here. I'm going to teach you one other term right now, and that is liberty. It's not the same as give me liberty or give me death. It just means a short break. So we're going to take 10 minutes, and then we'll resume.
So let's go ahead and get started for the second part. And I just wanted to introduce to you, after we went through the terminology, the Navy, because, you know, the Marine Corps is really part of kind of like the stepsister, the little sister of the Department of Navy. That's the Marine Corps falls underneath the Navy.
We're the men's department.
I wanted to introduce you. This is actually my portion of the presentation, Dr. Thomas. I wanted to introduce to you, these are Marine Corps rubber ducks, and I believe Dr. Thomas took these out of his bathtub just for this presentation. So, again, USMC. All right, so I love this slide. It's just designed for more of the senior administrators where there's less text and more pictures. But there's something to be said about this, and sometimes we roll into a video clip of Restrepo, which is a documentary, and it is a gnarly trailer. And has anybody seen Restrepo? I would really recommend watching as much of it as you possibly can to get an idea of what the intensity of a combat experience in Afghanistan could evolve into. And at one point, of course, they're interviewing one of the members of the platoon on observation post Restrepo, named after the medic who was their platoon medic, who was the first person killed in this particular tour of duty in Afghanistan. This individual's eyes are glazed over, and we used to say they look like road maps to Muncie. He looks haggard as a young man, probably 20 or 22 years old. And he says words to the effect of, I don't know how I'm going to transition. I don't know how I'm going to make it. All I know is I don't want to forget my experience because I'm proud of it. It's a part of me, and I can't let it go. But I've got to figure out and this isn't what he says, I've got to figure out, I've got to rationalize that experience. So veterans are going to do that, and they're coming off of this Rock of Gibraltar, and literally there is nothing underneath them. Some people have said, gosh, they're a little bit similar to emancipated foster care children. Okay, I can see the comparison. When there's no more structure, this structure within the culture that Marshall talked about it becomes a part of you. You assimilate. You don't integrate. Integration isn't accepted in the Department of Defense. If you're just stuck with integration, you're going to find yourself on the way out immediately. You have to embrace it. It is a matter of assimilation. You become that culture. Now, that culture's done. Now, here's the deal, is that the Department of Defense has no psychosocial readjustment program for veterans when they return. I've been saying this, I think, for, the VetNet program has been around for 4 years, coming up in February. And we know there's nothing done because we've had more than 30, 35 panels. Marshall's had many more than that, panels of student veterans whose narratives scream out to the fact that they didn't know what was coming at them. It's not just informational, it's cultural. And the ones who really share, you can hear that there's an issue here, and we know that. We've known it for a long time. Now, they do have a transition assistance program that is across the services, and they're trying to do a better job at standardizing that. They're even talking about including, now, where are we at here? Going on 2014, so it's been a couple of years that we've been doing warfare, and that veterans have been leaving the service. They're actually talking about, and since 2009, the GI Bill, telling them a little bit more about education. So that they're going to do that now. A couple years ago, they said, oh, well, we really should tell them about their veterans' benefits. Good, that's great. It's a Department of Labor program. It's paid for by the Department of Labor and is funded and is arranged in the curriculum, this transition system. So it's job development, resume writing, things like that. Well, I can tell you that veterans leaving the service need more than that. And they're not getting it. So if they don't get it, what happens to them? I mean, if you look at the slide, we think that maybe they're going to find it on campus. We hope they're going to find it on campus. We know that some of the best practices individually for the veteran are to keep moving. Keep moving. Don't take a year off. Don't sit down. Stand up and work on it. We also know that veterans sometimes don't understand how much damage has been done. And that there's not just this videotape, we talked about bomb blasts and improvised explosive devices. We're actually just learning that it's not just like a football injury. Even though we've seen through media how these bomb blasts have raised our attention as a society, we've looked at now high school football players and traumatic brain injury with the helmets that they're wearing. When veterans experience bomb blasts, usually within 300 meters of an explosion, but depending on the size of the charge, these individuals are being damaged in other parts of their body. They have organ damage that we're only now starting to discover. These are crazy things. I spoke with a veteran. He said, I think I've been blown up 12 or 13 times. I can't remember. You can't remember how many times he's been blown up. Well, sure, you can't remember because he's a walking traumatic brain injured veteran. And it's going to take him a long time to get through the College of Engineering at Cal State Long Beach. And he struggles with it. He struggles with all kinds of issues. So we see this. On a road to employment and to self-sufficiency, they are going to, in many cases, struggle with their experiences and other factors from their service. Their military perspective. Just from my investigation for my dissertation, the most significant factor in a number of independent variables, and I won't go into too much detail, was military service. Individuals who had a negative military impression or a negative perspective of their military service were much more likely to not persist in higher education than those who had a sound and positive military perspective. This is, I think, the new UC transfer program with community colleges. You know, I said UC. I'm just kidding. I use this slide to say, look, you think it's confusing. It is super confusing for veterans who no longer are wearing a uniform. And they say, Pat, well, look, the Department of Defense is a pretty big bureaucracy. Yes, it is. And so they get bureaucracies, and they should be bureaucracy-proof. You know, it's like a shirt you wear. I'm bureaucracy-proof. Well, no, not necessarily. You know, the Department of Defense, typically when you were working with staff people, they were in uniform. And you can see their rank, and you can even see the combat patch, you know, in the Army. And there's a conversation that goes on. All of a sudden, you've got a rapport with these individuals just because of you see so much of who they are, you understand the culture so much. You may recognize something they have on their desk as an accoutrement to a place and a time and a group of people that that are in common with you. You have so many other common points. You can look at the, like I said, the combat patch and say, when were you with the 101st Airborne Division? Because I was with them and I was in such and all of a sudden, it's not, you know, financial aid advisor and, you know, client, you know, it's now comrades. There's a strong bonding that goes on that does not exist at the community college level. But that's okay because we see that, you know, they're coming to the community colleges because of the open enrollment and the ease of getting into a community college. I mean, I did a qualitative research piece with just 3 veterans on why did you leave a for-profit college or university? And, you know, the 180 degrees to that was, why did you get into? Why did you, you know, start or become admitted to a for-profit? It was so easy. Hands down, and I'm not looking to infer this to greater populations, but all 3 of them said, oh, it's easy to do. They were really supportive. They made it so easy. What's not easy sometimes is to go the public education route. But let's just say they do, and after spending hopefully just 2 years at a community college, but typically 3 years at a community college, then what happens is they transfer and everything shifts. Now you've got a completely different bureaucracy, whether it's the UC or CSUs. And, oh, by the way, you know, we say if you've ever met a veteran, you've met just one veteran. If you've ever been to a CSU veterans office, you've done just that. You've been to one veterans office. Because in some of the CSU campuses, there are no veterans office, and there's no space, all right? There are significant challenges. We don't standardize amongst the 112 California community colleges. Do we standardize? How could we? I mean, boards of trustees actually will manage districts, and those are so local. It's very difficult. Whereas a veteran would say, well, you know what? Everybody in the 101st Airborne Division, everybody who was in an infantry unit did it this way because it was dictated, it was regimented, it was very, very centrally, authoritatively based. So they're coming into almost the exact opposite situation. A challenge? Most definitely. Then it's time to get some health care. And veterans may actually find themselves between a rock and a hard spot. We've discovered too many situations where veterans with VA appointments didn't get that VA appointment because if they did, they were going to miss a test that wasn't going to be made up. Yet, you know, when I talk to a campus president, he's trying to say, look, veterans with priority registration for classes, well, you know, yeah, but, you know, athletes are just as important. Like, well, okay, yes, sir. But did you know that really sometimes it takes up to 60 days to get an appointment with the VA for an immediate issue, immediate response issue? And so when, you know, you can't compare apples and oranges in this case. And so my recommendation is don't ever go against a sports or athletics program or priority anything for athletes and use veterans or try to compare. You might not win in that particular case, as I completely lost. But the point of it is that veterans do have issues that are common and considerations that we all need to think about. So in this world of veterans, we started off in 2009, really, by and large, the GI Bill was one of the biggest influences for veteran success that we've seen since 1944. And it's an amazing program. And then in 2010, we had some very interesting things happen where they came out after a year and re-legislated the GI Bill into the Veterans, I think they call it Veterans Improvement Act or something like that. Anyway, it was a GI Bill 2.0. And what we saw was some very interesting things come out, for those of you who understand the net payer clause, was that all of a sudden, we were not involving just a certifying official anymore. We had to involve the campus, bursar's office, and financial aid, because now the GI Bill was going to be the last payer after financial aid and all the other benefits, Pell Grants, et cetera, that were provided to the student veteran. I mean, this was huge. What did it do? Probably a little bit of consternation. These are unfunded requirements. And in public education, that's a tough one. And in 2009 and 2010, what was going on then? Did somebody in Sacramento had a machete and just whacked the CCC and CSU budgets and UC budgets? Absolutely. And that was a tough time. That was a real tough time to roll it out. But we didn't stop there within this GI Bill 2.0. We also said that there are some very clear standards on your rate of pursuit. And these standards on the rate of pursuit said that you had to be over a certain amount. And it disregarded individuals who needed time to take care of healthcare issues. So really, you were either taking care of your healthcare issues as a disabled veteran, or you were attending your classes. Now, I will say, you could have received a lower housing allowance in this process. But can you imagine? You're going to lower my housing allowance in California? How am I going to subsist? So what didn't happen was probably an acknowledgement and a pursuit of taking care of healthcare issues. And then, of course, break pay. Two of the toughest months for young families is December and January. And of course, break pay was now prorated. So if you were not in school, you were not paid. And many veterans still spend some amount of time planning ahead to pay January's mortgage payment or rental payment, more likely, because they're not paid. They're paid for a partial payment for December and only a couple of days in many cases because of winter break for January. So these were things, I'm not sure it was an improvement, but this is the world that veterans are living in. And now we've seen sequestration, we've seen government shutdown. What happened during the government shutdown with our veterans? They got paid, but wasn't it that there was going to be a point where there was going to be no more money for them? What else happened? So when the government shuts down, probably the biggest statement is they don't process stuff. There's no overtime in processing claims. All right, so now you've got, again, the very bottleneck situation with claims for reimbursement for education. Yes. Parts of the VA. So if you had a vet success program on campus, your VA counselor didn't show up to work. The Secretary of Department of Veterans Affairs during a government shutdown is not allowed to talk to veterans. Can you imagine that? So these dynamics don't change. All you have to do is listen to your veterans when these things happen. It creates a tenseness. it creates stress in their life, without doubt. You know, I'm gonna let Marshall explain this slide. He's got the data better than I do.
Okay, one of the big things that we talk about a lot is really important to community college counselors is transfer from community college to our schools. And I'll talk about it a little bit deeper, but one of the important things I want you to see here is the percentages of students that are applying to our campus, Cal State Long Beach, and what's happening with them once they apply. So, and of course, I don't have the whole number here, and I am not a math major, so I'm not going to add it very quickly, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 200, something like that, applicants for this spring. We accepted spring admissions at Cal State Long Beach. So of those, 79 students were admitted, and then we had these that were denied by the CSU. They hadn't met the CSU requirements yet. These are the ones that were denied by our particular campus, and then we have some that have been withdrawn. Now, what the withdrawal really means is that they didn't do something for their application that they needed to. Now, that maybe they didn't pay their fee. There were a couple of them that just didn't pay fee, which, you know, what do you expect if you don't pay your fee? There's another group of people that didn't submit what we call a supplemental application, and that's because our campus is an impacted campus. So there are specific courses that you have to take to get into any major. And in some cases, well, in all cases, you have to submit that supplemental application after the first application, the first round of kind of denials or whatever. And some students just don't submit it because they just don't get around to it. And we get those phone calls. Hey, I missed a deadline. Sorry, you missed a deadline. We can't do anything for you. Others took a second look at their application packet and said, oh, actually, I didn't really take the classes I needed to. So they don't submit the supplemental application either. So this is just kind of an idea of, this is as current data as you could possibly have. This is Wednesday of this week. And we're already looking now at the fall applications where we have 528 people that have applied, and we'll see how many of those make it through that admissions process.
The complexity of it is obvious. If you're not tracking and you're not following and you're not reading and you're not able to stay on top of some of these admissions processes, it changes, and it changes year to year. It changes with state funding. It changes with programs that all of you would never hear of, like a student success program where just on one campus they raise the fees and the fees are used for some other program. You don't know about this and what's going on. Hopefully this is a little bit more, you know, transparent, but still, yet it is extremely complex for a veteran to go through the transfer process. There are other research surveys that inform us of how veterans are different in higher education. The National Survey for Student Engagement out of the University of Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, has done this for a number of years, probably, I think, maybe even decades. 2010, they took a stab at looking at what veterans had to say about their satisfaction with higher education. And it's interesting, of course, I was surprised that 11,000 would self-identify. I thought that's amazing because my experience is sometimes it's not that tendency. And so we also see that it was both first-year students as well as seniors. And the fact that 20% were combat veterans, 10% with disabilities, kind of highlights how different these students are. But really what was poignant was the fact that they felt less engaged. They perceived lower levels of support from their campus. Something else we saw in this same report was that your combat veterans, or veterans in general, were spending a lot more time for childcare. And so this is an aspect, again, of this adult student that we see on all our campuses, and the growing number of adult students that are either coming back to college or initially pursuing college or a college education. Let's not leave out all the drama that's been going on about for-profit education. Again, should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I? I was just recently talking to a veteran and said, why the degree with University of Phoenix? I'm not digging on him. I looked into it myself. He said, well, it was just easy for me to do. The campus is close to my house. It seemed, it's pretty, and there's not the big, campus social environment with this because I don't have time. I have a new wife. I have a daughter. I have a full-time job, and this was the easiest thing for me to do. And so, yet, there is criticism, significant criticism, about some of the things that are going on with for-profits. And again, this isn't to, throw stones at all, one organization or another organization. It is part of the drama that veterans are seeing and experiencing when they make a decision to pursue an education. Of course, the principles of excellence were probably most noted where the President of the United States in an executive order said, look, this predatory recruiting has got to stop. We need to clarify the financial aid regulations and make sure veterans understand they can leverage other areas of financial aid. And part of that has to do with the fact that it has gained so much national attention. I think Senators Larkin and Durbin have made it their personal responsibility to oversee what's going on with the $30 billion that have been spent on the, 1 million veterans? So some of us ask these questions because here in California, public education has been kept very, very low cost. And sometimes that's tough for us because we know how low cost it is. And so I won't go into that. It's another argument for another time. But this is still part of the drama that goes on with our student veterans. We know, just in summary, we know that there are some very, very important things that they need. And if they don't have these, I can tell you, it really makes it more difficult for them to figure things out. And these are important. The counseling and the outreach between our systems, as well as priority admissions. We just reviewed California Code of Education says veterans are admitted at the highest priority within 6 different categories. The only 6 there are within all categories of students, whether transfer or whether traditional students. That's a pretty strong statement. Priority registration now we have is Dr. Thomas will cover some of that. And of course, some of the other important things, peer networking, when we can get that. At the CSUs, it's sometimes difficult to get that kind of peer networking that we want to see. Some veterans don't want anything to do with other veterans. And then, of course, the final big gap that we see is unemployment. So, of course, we're missing Dr. Mike Barraza, but what we do right now is we go into a status exercise, and really it's just whether one would identify as a veteran or not identify as a veteran. And it's easy for us to do with a student panel, although I missed the student panel. I understand that was not covered, but it really drives at the essence of veterans and how they feel about themselves and how they identify. Was anybody in the women's veterans? Okay, so there was one point where one of the panelists said, "So, I would not ever identify as a veteran." And it was interesting because she was never asked that question, but she felt so strongly that she wouldn't do that. We sometimes have people in the audience who are veterans. We say, "Hey, veterans, if you'd like to disclose," we ask, "Would you like to disclose?" Because some people don't want to disclose. So let's look at this because this is actually kind of a cool part of the seminar. We have some vignettes, and we're going to use 2 vignettes, or
I have 4.
You have 4. Let's do all 4, because then that makes it a little bit different. But really what we're trying to do is understand when a veteran would self-identify. And so we'll pass out 4 vignettes. what we'd like to do is we've kind of
You
got
kinda-
some groupings of
You could
people.
kind of organically form into groups of about
Yeah, maybe right
maybe 4,
here,
5, 6
back
maybe.
there, right over there, and right up here.
Organically.
And just
no preservatives. I'm
turn
not
your
sure what I even
chairs
meant by that.
around and get comfortable, and Marshall will hand out some
Naturally,
vignettes.
yes.
Okay, let's go ahead and discuss this. Within your groups, feel free to share your thoughts. If you had different perspectives than other people within the group, we love diversity, and there is no right answer. So vignette 1, you're a 24-year-old Asian American. After some time, you recognize that the difficulties you are having in life and class are related to PTSD. You have had to take some classes over, and only recently have you begun to see a therapist who tells you it is going to get better. You're not feeling like much has changed and are in close contact with a staff faculty member who has negative views about current military actions and often criticizes decisions and operations that you participated in. During these actions, you might have experienced trauma or lost friends. This course is important for you to progress in your studies, which you've had significant difficulties with. Would you disclose your status? Who had vignette 1? Would you like to share with us class, office hours, group project with peers? No. In any of those environments, you would not disclose. Okay. So if a veteran felt close to the peers in their group project, perhaps they were close enough to know and respect each other to the point where those kind of perspectives and his or her identity would be shared. Okay, great, great. Anybody else from the group? Pretty. Sure. Right. Sure. Right. There's some issues there. Yes, sir.
I shared at our college that this actually happened. The vets got together and they had requested to have a panel to talk to the faculty and say don't bash us and relax things. I think an individual would have a real hard time, although some have spoken out and actually battled with the professor, but I think it would be hard to do that. And as Asian Americans, particularly Vietnamese, there's a real respect for the instructor, and we have the reluctance to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, great comments. Great comments. Vignette 2, you are a 28-year-old European American woman. After having served, you feel very different from other students. You're older than most and recently divorced. Your experiences in different countries have provided you with a very different perspective. You recognize that few people on campus have similar experiences as you. This has made your transition very difficult. You've felt rejected and believe some people have even distanced themselves from you when you've disclosed your status as a veteran. Recently, you've been able to form some friendships, but worry about how you'll be perceived if you talk about your experiences as part of the military. Again, would you disclose in class, maybe office hours, or during a group project with peers? Who had vignette 2? What do you think? Okay.
So those are probably some winning solutions, especially letting veterans know that you're veteran friendly, and we've had that, and I mean that's a best practice that you say works effectively. And you're right. I think when you find classes where there's an audience that is receptive to the military, or there's many veterans in that particular cohort, you'll find a completely different dynamic. But great, yes.
Singling out one group as opposed to disabled students friendly, I'm LGBT friendly, I'm vet friendly. What? How is that?
I think that's
by saying, I understand, because of environments like this, some of the issues you're dealing with, and also is that a point to go to say, because some veterans don't know about our veteran center. And be able to say, I'm not that expert, but let me take you to this.
I would add to that, and we're really going to run out of time if we go too deeply into this, but I didn't mean that in an offensive way at all. One of the things that we've seen people do is take the VetNet Ally logo and just put it on their syllabus. Now, when it's used all over your campus, we have 500 people on our campus that have been through it. People know what that is, but you can also do that with a Safe Zone Ally decal or something like that. If it's on your office, it's one thing, but just put it on your signature block on your email. That's fine too. So.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Because this nonsense about I'm vet friendly, and got a freaking clue that these veterans, first of all, stressed and frustrated and pissed off because when 18-year-olds have never been outside the neighborhood, think they know everything, and they're stressed about pencils and pens and college stuff. They just want to sit out the stupid house. One of them offered to do that for me. And I think that if the teachers are trying to, and especially at North, if the teachers are trying to be all PC and stuff with the, whatever, unless they can walk the walk, they shouldn't talk the talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So when a faculty member feels comfortable with doing something like that, as Marshall said, we also encourage any of the other Safe Zone programs, which are AB 540 undocumented students, as well as the LGBTQI.
I think you got them all.
Did I? Okay. That's just about diversity. It's about sensitivity, and it's about our humanity and our respect. So we certainly encourage that, and if you're not knowledgeable about that, you might be hesitant about doing it, but become knowledgeable. That's the point. So.
And we need to move on.
Yeah,
we're
we'll
run
we'll
way
have
into
that.
lunch.
We'll continue that discussion, and we'll
And
go
I
to
will talk about it again before we
vignette.
finish.
We'll go to vignette 3. Vignette 3 is a little bit different. A 25-year-old Latina political science major who served in the Coast Guard. When you have previously disclosed your having served, you are often asked why the military continues to maintain a presence in Iraq or Afghanistan if the U.S. will establish a base there and if you've killed someone. You have repeatedly explained to people the function of the Coast Guard, and they continue to ask you the same questions. You're tired of answering the questions like these, and do not want to be the spokesman for current military actions. Who had, and this was, yeah, who had, oh, you, okay, back in the back, okay. Got it. Yeah. Right. So this is very interesting. Absolutely. And you're the kind of the first one to more or less identify that, because we know that there's many factors involved with this. Ethnicity is just one of them. The age, the fact that someone's divorced or has a child, et cetera, continues to influence not just their veteran status, but their status as a human being. So thank you. Okay, vignette 5. You are a 23-year-old African-American man who had tremendous amounts of responsibility placed on you when you were in the military. As part of the U.S. Marine Corps White House Security Detachment, you carried a loaded weapon in the presence of the President of the United States. At times, you have been trained to accomplish things many people never even consider themselves capable of doing. You are often irritated at hearing people complain in class about things you consider to be trivial. And who had that vignette? Okay.
So generally we said we would probably not disclose a status, but it depends on really looking as a student when you look at the contextual cues of what's happening in class and our interactions with the faculty member or in group projects. And then one of the other pieces that I had been thinking about is as an African American man on a community college campus, thinking about how, you know, when you walk in, people will see you as a veteran, right? They see you as an African American man, and how that is already loaded with all these assumptions about who you are or what you're capable of doing. And so in a space with, like in an African American men's group or something, maybe I would disclose some of that to be able to point to the pieces of, you know, what my experience is that I'm proud of, and to show that I'm capable of handling a lot of responsibilities.
Great. That's a great way to summarize it. So many different aspects involved in that. Of course, Marshall, I don't know if you'd like to share the story, how this vignette was drafted.
This vignette is actually about a person that I knew when I was in the Marine Corps. And in fact, it was written this way because at one point he said, how many other 23-year-old men do you know who have stood in the same room with the President of the United States with a loaded weapon under his jacket? I said, well, now I know one. And that was the only person I've ever met that way. And you bring up a really good point. You know, African-American men are really underrepresented on a lot of college campuses. At Long Beach State, I think our African-American population is about 4%. So he probably already stands out enough that he might not want to add another layer of standing out. That said, he's 6'2", very fit, with outstanding military bearing because he stood guard in front of the White House. So he's going to stand out anyway. So he probably would have let people know, especially when he got frustrated. But you're right. There are times where he might have not wanted that to be.
What about in a romance relationship? We kept going, he and I don't know, we
for you guys to decide. That's the
We'll
point.
stay out of romance for right now. That's always tough. And I think we've got our last segment, a very important segment, the stuff that Marshall is going to share. One of the things that keeps coming up, comments about people saying, hey, copies of slides and things like that, I think that's all being included. The idea that you could find veterans on your campus to be able to help you build an awareness program like that is one of the reasons we share this. And then I'll let Marshall finish up here.
Would you like to take Sergeant Duck to keep you company on that?
Don't need any ducks, thank you.
All right. Okay, so what are we doing to help veterans in higher education? And I'm going to try and be as cognizant of the time as I can. I think we have about 15 minutes left here. First off, we want to talk quickly about what's happening in California. We had legislation passed last year that provides priority registration for people on active duty in the reserves or National Guard, and they get 4 years of priority registration within 15 years of leaving the service, which is a really strange way to write a law. So it actually provides a lot of flexibility for us as well. I can't say, well, you got 2 years of priority registration at the community college, now you're here. When they show up, if it's within 15 years, we give them priority registration. So that's a good thing. It's unfortunate, but a lot of campuses didn't give priority registration until the law required them to do it. So it's fortunate that we've had people that have pushed for that kind of legislation. AB 2462 affects the community college system, and it requires a chancellor to determine what credits will be given for military service by 2015, I believe, and to my knowledge, they haven't really started deeply into that project yet, and that's going to be a major project. AB 2478 extends in-state residency for an additional year for community college students who got out of the service in the state of California. Once again this year, legislation was offered that would have extended in-state residency to all veterans, and it got stuck in committee yet again, and it seems to happen every single year that way. So we'll see going forward if someone can navigate that political system well enough to make that happen. In the CSU, we do have Troops to College special admissions. That's been going on for a few years. We offer 115 slots, 5 for each one of our campuses, for people that have been recommended by their services. So the Marine Corps, the Navy will send those people through our Chancellor's office and then down to the individual campuses. That's a policy that's under review right now. We'll see if we want to continue that or expand it or what will happen with that. We also allow rolling application deadlines because, as you all know, application deadline for next fall just passed, right, on the 30th. And but what if you get out of the service in January and you decide you want to apply? Well, we have the ability now to accept applications from veterans beyond that application deadline if they've just gotten out of the service. At our campus, yes. Well, I'm going to answer that. Not exactly right now. How about that? Yes, it's system-wide that it's an option. How it's handled at each campus will be different. And I think that's a point that I'm going to drive home in the next slide or two. I'm going to talk about Cal State Long Beach. Cal State Long Beach is a little bit unique in the system in that we get more applications than all but about 4 universities in the entire United States. So we're getting over 80,000 applications for the fall, and that's been consistent the last couple of years. So we're a fully impacted campus. And what that means is that every single major has specific requirements that you have to meet to get into that major. Because the CSUs are designed to serve the local community first, there is a priority system for people that have graduated high school in the Long Beach area. Our campus has said that we also extend that local preference to veterans, so that if they meet the standards that are established for that major, then they'll be offered admission as long as they're a veteran. This is wonderful for me in my role because I no longer have to tell students, well, you have all the classes, you have the minimum GPA, but it's competitive. So for veterans, that's the way we give them kind of a priority in admissions. But again, that's only Cal State Long Beach. Every other school is going to do it their own way. Yes. Okay. If you hit the requirements, you're good to go. Yeah. Yeah, those recommendeds are going to come in if you're a non-local student, meaning you're a non-veteran and you live out of the area. Once you get into competitive admissions, they're going to start looking at those classes as well. But for veterans, hit the minimums and they're right there. And it's all online. Choose your major. It tells you exactly what you need to do. So I think we're really fortunate, and I think that the other campuses will catch up to that kind of transparency. Some are already there, some are not. Transferring to the CSU campus. This is kind of the critical component I wanted to make. Counselors, again, please raise your hand. I would like to make some points that are specific to you today. The requirement to transfer to a CSU campus are that you must have 60 units, of which you need the Golden 4, which we all know what they are: oral communication, written communication, critical thinking, and math. You do not, let me say this very loudly, you do not need to be GE certified to transfer to a CSU. And I say that clearly because I've had students sit in my office and tell me they already had 70 units, but their counselor told them they need to take a history class in order to transfer, which meant they were going to take the history class and 3 other classes for a semester, delay their entry into CSU, use a semester's worth of GI Bill, and have 3 other classes that would not transfer because they had already hit the 70 units that they needed. So please, 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 if they can get GE certified, wonderful. If they can do an AS or an AAT or an AST, wonderful. But if their goal is to transfer, know what the transfer requirements are and counsel them on those, because over half of my veterans that graduated last spring did so having already exhausted their GI Bill because they stayed too long at the community college. So that's my soapbox. Yes. I can. They're going to have to make an individual decision at that point. The nice thing about the AST or the AAT is they know they can come and just take 60 more units. So that's a positive thing. But they're going to have to balance that GI Bill and decide which is going to be best for them. Again, GE certification is great, but it's not a transfer requirement. And I have counselors that tell people it is all the time. It's not. But again, all 23 campuses have unique admissions requirements. I'm going to point at my UC colleagues over here and say they probably have a very similar situation. When your student tells you where they want to go, contact the people at that campus and find out what are your requirements. What will you do for vets? And then advise your student in that way. Many campuses, I would even say most campuses, have special admissions programs for vets. Bottom line, again, I sound like I would say I'm beating a dead horse, but apparently it's still alive and running. I'm going to keep beating it, which is talk to the people at the campus your student wants to go to. It's really, really, really important. Okay, what do we do at Cal State Long Beach? And this is kind of a model that other campuses could use. This is our CSULB Veteran Services. I'm the director. I work on advocacy, doing things like this, and outreach, going to community colleges and military bases or wherever I can talk to veterans. I have a school certifying official and a veterans advisor. So that advisor, which you guys would call a counselor, is the kind of person that can sit down and talk about the academic requirements and the GI Bill and how they intersect. So she is a wonderful human being who knows more about the GI Bill and our requirements than probably anybody else. We have an administrative coordinator, and then we have VA work study folks. We also are very fortunate because this year we were selected to be a Vet Success on Campus program. It means we have a partnership between the United States Department of Veterans Affairs and our campus, and they provide a bunch of things which I am not going to read all the way through for time, but essentially we have a representative of the Department of Veterans Affairs that can work with federal benefits, even beyond educational benefits, and our students. She works on our campus, has an office right within our center. We are one of 62 new locations. These are all the schools in California that were added this year. There are now 94 campuses nationwide. And one of the things that we did was we recognized that we have a strong connection between our local community college, Long Beach City College. So we have partnered with them, and our Vet Success Counselor actually works on both campuses. So she spends a couple of days on our campus, a couple of days on the other one. It's just another way to build a bridge between what should be our largest feeder school. Okay, now a lot of times I'm asked, well, what else do you do for veterans? And I think that one of the things that we can do as kind of the Veterans Office is we can think we're the big circle in the middle of everything, and that we should do everything we can for our vets. But the most important thing we can do is partner with other people and recognize we're only one small part. So what we've done on our campus is we have actually connected with all of these other services. Disabled Student Services, they can provide things that we cannot. Counseling and psychological services, enrollment services, outreach, career development, student financial services, advising, student health services, even our tutoring center on campus. I'm often asked, well, do you have special tutors? Well, yeah, I sure do. They're over in the Learning Assistance Center. They have about 100 tutors. They're all trained, supervised, CRLA certified. Why do I want to duplicate that? They do a great job over there. If there's a fee for it, I'll pay for it. Not a problem. We'll take care of them. But the key is to remember that our goal is to integrate our students into the campus community so that they can be good citizens of the campus and be good citizens of their local community. We're not trying to segregate our vets, and I think it's a horrible idea to do that. It's a great thing to have a Boots to Books course to kind of get people in the groove, but everything else, they should be part of the campus community, and that's what we try to do there. Okay, we do things like the president holds a barbecue for all of our graduating vets every year at his house. We have a Women Veterans Luncheon with our Women's Resource Center. We have our veterans meet the deans. We have Meet the Deans luncheons. The reality is most students don't even know what a dean is, much less who it is, so this is a good thing. During Veterans Week this year, we had a mini film festival. We did Reserve to Fight and Restrepo, a Veteran Services open house. We did this for students instead of just faculty and staff. And then we had our Veterans Day ceremony with speeches and flags flying and music. It was good stuff. And then, of course, Veterans Days, right next to the Marine Corps birthday. Got to have Marine Corps birthday cake because those Marines love the cake and love ceremonies. So we have to cut the cake with a sword and all that kind of stuff. It's great. We have a student veteran organization. I strongly encourage those, but I also tell my student vets, if you're only going to join one student organization on this campus, don't join this one. Go find one that is focused on your major. Go find one that's focused on a special interest so that you can, again, become a civilian and be part of the world. If you're going to join two, definitely come to this one because we want you to be in both. Okay, situational awareness. Talk a little bit about the things we need to be aware of on our campuses. A dropped class can have an impact on any student, but for a vet who's using GI Bill, it means he's not going to get or she's not going to get a full housing allowance. Big deal. Controversial class topic. It's probably not the appropriate thing to talk about in a pottery lab, the Iraq War. And it happens. So yes, academic freedom is wonderful, but it's supposed to be focused on the material of the course. So just be aware of that. We've had students singled out, and it's just really not appropriate. Unit deployments are not just about when they leave. It's also about the months leading up to it. So students can, if they're in the reserves or the National Guard, they can be working towards a deployment for months, for a whole semester, and we want to recognize that it's going to have an impact on their life and their ability to maintain their studies properly. Anti-war demonstrations on campus. They don't happen much on community college campuses. Universities are a completely different animal, and it's very important to recognize that, hey, First Amendment is a wonderful thing. That's why we all put the uniform on to begin with, is to support that right. However, we want to make sure that if there's going to be an anti-war demonstration on campus, that we let our vets know that it's going to be happening and where it's going to be happening, because some of them may go join in. Others may find it very, very offensive to see photos of fallen soldiers on a wall somewhere. We want to let them know that it's going on, so they might want to park on the other side of campus that week to protect themselves and their own emotional state. So again, we support the fact that people are doing this, but we want to also protect our vets and let them make a decision, an educated decision. Depletion of GI Bill resources is an enormously huge issue, especially once people have used a lot of their benefit at a community college and then transfer. They run out of benefits. It's a lot more expensive to go to a UC or a CSU than it is to go to the community college. And if you don't have a housing allowance and you don't have your tuition paid, it's just a huge burden. Okay, I want to show a very quick video here before I finish up. We don't really do a lot about mental health issues here today because I know that Dr. Joseph is doing a great job, actually literally right now, and he did it also yesterday. If you saw this yesterday, I'm sure you'll agree that it's worth watching twice. This is the best video I've seen of how PTSD can have an impact on a student in a college environment. So it's about 4 minutes long.
Empirical formula for using mass of each element.
Conversion factors make use of the relationship between two units of quantities expressed in fractional form.
Guys, let's focus.
All right, fine. Quiz time, huh?
Great.
All right. Single cell organisms break down organic molecules through
Metabolism.
The core of the hemoglobin molecule is
Iron.
macromolecules are ozone is bounded by what?
This isn't happening. This isn't happening.
We will fight our country's battles in the air and then the sea.
Complement of atoms, ions, and molecules and samples.
You know this one, Brandon. Brandon.
Guys.
Got it. Hey, you want to talk about this? We're home now.
Brandon, you okay?
It's just, you know, sometimes just little things, they just send you back, and I'm just trying to work through it still.
I think it's just a really important thing for us to see that some of our students are faced with this issue. There's not always another vet sitting around that can help them out. And obviously that 1 little minute thing is not going to be the solution to all that guy's problem. But it does show that social support, both with the vet that came up and said, hey, are you okay? And the students afterwards showing that they cared as well. We are the community that's going to make students feel better, right? In some way, we're part of that. So, all right. And it's very touching. I see some of you that are touched by it. I've seen it dozens of times. It touches me as well. All right. So let's talk about responding to veterans. This one's a little bit controversial. I've had people come and talk to me about this a lot. Be careful when you say thank you to veterans. Because you know what? Some of them feel really great about their experience. Others don't. And when you say thank you, you may be thanking them for something that in their mind is that village that they shot up thinking there were bad guys in it, and it was really kids, right? That's their memory. They don't want to be thanked for that. But the other thing is this idea that everybody says, thank you for your service, thank you for your service, thank you for your service. Kind of like they say, hey, how's it going? So it's a lot better if you can really look someone in the eye and say, you know what, your service really means something to me. If it does, right? Let them know that. And people can tell when you're being genuine. They really can. Refrain from discussing the war unless the course content dictates that you should. Never put a veteran on the spot. Not just avoid. Don't ever put a veteran on the spot about their experience, especially in a classroom setting. It's never appropriate. Sometimes veterans are going to complain about their non-veteran peers. We talked about that already. Veterans may not be used to thinking in gray. We talked about that when I said, oh, question the author, right? So be aware of that. We have to guide them along. Veterans don't often understand group work in a college setting. They understand group work, but it usually is, we're going to get together, we're going to do this. When they feel like they're the only one doing the work, or they can't get people to return their calls and all that kind of stuff, it can be very frustrating. This is very important. If it seems like a vet is having problems, they might be. Now, one of the things I want to be very clear about today is that we're not training you to do anything at all. We're just bringing awareness here. So please don't leave here thinking, I got to help this vet. I gotta talk to him about this stuff. Find the professionals. Know who they are on your campus. And if you see a vet in trouble, yeah, ask them, hey, is everything okay with you? If they say no, then say, listen, let's go get someone that can help out with that. Be aware of who is on your campus that can help. In college, random self-selected seating is usually not a problem. If a veteran has a VA appointment, if you're an instructor, please let them go. It takes forever to reset that. I'll let you read that one on your own. It happens all the time. Okay, so as we wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about being an ally to veterans. The mission of this program and the mission of our allies is really this. We want to support the academic freedom, professional, and personal growth of our service members and veterans. Provide them support and information and assistance when we can. Respect their right to privacy and their right to confidentiality. But most importantly, create a welcoming environment to the campus, for veterans on your campus. Make them feel like they belong there. You can do that by putting up our decal. Okay. Actually, I didn't update this slide. We have over 500 VetNet allies at CSULB. We've been doing this for about 3.5, almost 4 years, and it's been well received. But if that was all it was, then it wouldn't be as special as it's about to be here. We've also presented at all these other schools as well. Cal State LA, Dominguez Hills, UC Irvine, Long Beach City, National and Vanguard, and then 9 different community colleges. You're going to find those stickers when you go there. Also been adopted by Cal State LA, UC Irvine, and Santa Monica, which means they actually run their own VetNet Ally programs now. They have the decal, they can give it out. Now, someone said, well, if you don't know what you're doing, don't tell people you're vet friendly. Well, guess what? We don't give our decals out unless people go through this whole thing, because you're not going to put a decal up there and then say, oh yeah, I know, I'm a vet supporter. Someone walks in someone's office and they go, so why did you go in the military? We don't want to do that. I think the thing I'm most proud of about this program is that Grand Valley State University developed VetNet Ally based on this program, and they're in Michigan. And then Georgetown actually has the Vet Ally program based on this as well. So it seems like a small group here today, but you're part of something that is much, much bigger. So I'm going to talk a little bit about putting the decal up. We're going to give each of you a decal today. Normally we have our student veterans give them out. I think it means more coming from them, but again, we had our panel yesterday. This decal is something that is kind of like the Marine Corps emblem for Marines. You earned it by being here today. So we ask you to put it up on your office space if you want to. If you do not feel comfortable putting it up there, that's fine. But if you would like to, put it up in your office space. Don't put it on the front door of the whole office, because, in most cases people are pretty vet friendly, but there might be somebody in your office that is not vet friendly, and you certainly don't want to advertise it as if they are. And if they want a decal like that, they can come to the training too. We give it all the time, so that's the way it works. And with that, I just would like to say thank you so much for being here today. We'll give everyone a decal, and if you would like to get the handbook, I need your information, either a business card, or I'll have a place you can write down your email address here, and I will send it to you on Monday. Thank you so much.